My archive was partially existing in an analogue version on slides and photography, and the process really is partly it's digitizing, which is just quite straightforward, so digitizing older material. But what really happens is that it allows you to look at this narrative of artworks that I've made over my lifetime so far, and you can start to read new stories into those. So it's a painful process in some senses, and sometimes it's really joyful, so it's really mixed. But what it's allowed me to do is really to understand the narrative around the artefacts that I've made and the drawings that I've made and the kind of setups that I've been involved in and the social situations that I've created through artwork. And the 360 project has really allowed me to build a coherent narrative around the actual artwork, which has been invaluable and completely brilliant, actually. I'm not keeping emails. I mean, maybe some people are, but I don't know how you would be a living person and just answer your emails and then manage to archive them as well. I don't know how anyone would do that. I think the archive is definitely going to be a different sort of scenario as we become more and more digitised. Just recently, I've begun to think about a book that I'd like to do around technology. I thought I'd like to do a book called Le Tech, and then within that I would make some kind of documentation of the different processes that I've engaged with as an artist. So some of them are very, very, very analogue, like drawing or painting. That's very much like just one-to-one thing, and others are mediated, so silk screen processes that I've used that are much more in an analogue and much more ancient, and then to set those against the journey with technology. So each computer that I've owned from the very first Apple that I was given after some gallery disposed of it, like the upgrades, to put those in, and then to maybe have some pages where some of the sort of social media that I do is like documented. I don't think I really need to document the whole of my Instagram forever. That would just be boring. But to look at the parallels between what I'm working with in terms of different technologies and different materials and different material processes. It's interesting when you do searches on things that happened before the computer, before we all had email and everything, because there are lots of things that are just not there. So that's interesting. Or then sometimes you come across people who are so wealthy that they've managed to take everything off the internet, and that's like the ultimate cool. There's nothing on them, and that's extraordinary. It's a sort of funny space. But my real passion is the engagement with actual materials in real life and the manipulation of materials and the sharing of them. So that's where I really feel happiest. In this country, there are no good material libraries that I'm aware of. Architectural firms tend to have really good material libraries, and I've been to the one at Foster's, and that's absolutely extraordinary. I'm presently in discussion with some great women from Cologne who want to work on a collective project between Zurich and Royal College, and I think that one of the things that the idea with this project, if it develops, would be to think about an artist's materials archive, because obviously different industries have their own needs in terms of materials and their own specialisations, but the idea would be thinking about artists and materials. One of the very early group shows that I was in when I left art school was at the Serpentine, outside the gallery on the lawn where the pavilion now happens. And I wanted to think about these symbols of nationhood. And so I made this ginormous Union Jack on the lawn, which was made with bottles from the bottle bank. So it was white glass and green glass and brown glass that was crushed. I was thinking about a flag that you might find in some outpost of empire, which was no longer empire, on a flagpole, weathering and faded, and so that none of the original colours would be still there. During the early 90s, I lived in this very large, in fact, two houses that were joined together on Guildford Street behind Russell Square Tube Station. And it was owned by the National Brain Hospital, and we squatted it. And it was very big, and there were 27 people living there when I moved in and 7 people living there when I moved out. And so it was materially lovely to live in, and the social conditions were great in some respects also, because we had a lot of social space. We started a Milch Gallery in that space, and then the exhibitions that happened would lead to lots of social events as well. So it was kind of a big open house, which was an extraordinary thing and wonderful. there was an exhibition at the Horse Hospital. I got in touch with some of the people that I used to live with, and we put together a small exhibition about that house. And the exhibition featured a kind of mood board, which was all sorts of photographs of the many, many, many social events that had happened there. And one of my friends made a film there, and there were all sorts of things going on. So that was represented in this mood board, artefacts from that time which have gone into official cultural realm through acquisitions into museums. So it was a great thing to do somehow, to make this very small grassroots exhibition of that moment. Artists and architects experimented with forms of living and different kinds of social arrangements, and I think it was a very valuable and instructive period of my life. Obviously, the economic conditions in London have changed exponentially since that time, and obviously as well there's a lot more people on the planet, so it's a more congested environment that we live in. But through my teaching, I'm aware of some of my students living in slightly similar kind of scenarios. For example, people living in Croydon in office buildings, which maybe they're paying modest rent for, or they're property guardians or something like that, but they have sufficient space and they can live communally, and they can put on events, and they can activate space. So artists are very good at sourcing these sorts of spaces. Then I started a project called Superstore, which was another kind of framework. So the idea of setting up in real life space where people can gather, and Superstore was set up as a store where artists could bring their artist multiples, and everyone could either swap or trade like that, artist to artist, or sell things to each other or to sort of other people who were coming in. It kind of caught people's imagination. So I then was given a lot of invitations to set up the Superstore again. So creating a shop is quite problematic for lots of people, because if you're a shop, then why would you need a gallery because you're already a shop? So I think a lot of artists avoid doing projects like that, because there are quite clear definitions in the art world that people operate within, and I've never been really good at understanding what those are. So I just do the projects that I think of, because I want to make work about the real world within the art framework in my own way, and that's what I've managed to do somehow. Though one of the things that attracted me to the idea of making Superstore was this idea around how trade happens and how that's a social activity. It's amazing how little theoretical work there's been done on retail, really. I mean, there's obviously Walter Benjamin's Arcade Projects is a seminal work and very well read inside academia. And then the sort of most fabulous book, really, I think, is the Rem Koolhaas's Harvard Guide to Shopping, which was published in 2001, which is a thoroughly comprehensive look at the history of shopping in Europe and in the Near East, and also North America, obviously. I mean, it's a global study, really. I made a lot of work using denim, and they're called anti-painting, so they're stretch canvases made with denim, and I've created images and made sort of word paintings through using bleach on the denim and taking the colour away. I feel very kind of interested in material, but I'm always interested in and inspired by these narratives around social change. A more recent completed public artwork is called Edith and Hans, and that was made for the University of Bristol. It's made from reclaimed brick and bespoke terracotta tiles, so that's a very giving material. And the work comprises of two kind of bench-like forms, and one is orientated to face the east for morning sun, and the other is orientated towards the west for the afternoon sun. And also from the bench that's orientated towards the west, you get an extremely long view over the hills and the valleys towards Wales. So it's in a meadow, but it's in a place where people weren't really going. So it's a kind of people attractor, and people now go there and they can stay there. And the lovely thing about that material is that in the summer, because it's terracotta, if it's a warm day, the terracotta absorbs the heat and it releases it very slowly back into the atmosphere. So if you were to sit there until midnight or 2 a.m, you'd still be warmed from the actual structure. It invites people to sit and to have dialogue, and that's the kind of point of this work. Through this process of looking at the archive really intensely and going over it and over it and over it, and then finding out where everything sits in relationship to each other, it definitely refreshes your memory in terms of where you were at and your interests, and it gives you a path into your history that is very particular. And I think that's been an invaluable experience to have that, and it definitely informs how I will be working in the future as well, I think.